Let's get joined up. Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joined up. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. So thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a regular show about all things writing, including interviews with authors, screenwriters, and key figures from the publishing industry. Plus loads of hints, tips, and inspiration for all creatives. You can follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast, leave a quick iTunes review, or just tell a friend. Right, I suppose I better cue that theme tune.
Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 130 with Luce Brett talking about her stigma-smashing memoir, PMSL. Luce has got loads to say about tackling tricky taboos, navigating the memoir minefield, and why now might just be the perfect time to pitch your book. Before that, a minuscule update from me. Minuscule because there really hasn't been much to report on the writing front. The day job's showing signs of recovery, which is great, so I've been busy making videos. But in between that, I've been editing one of the early chapters of my novel. But after reading it back again yesterday, I'm now gripped by self-doubt and convinced I might actually be at the stage where all this tinkering is actually beating the life and the voice out of the text. And the idea of just starting something entirely new grows more appealing by the day. But one positive is that after a break, I decided to revisit my synopsis. You might remember a few months ago when Kate Harrison came onto the show, she gave me some very useful and direct feedback on it, and I think I've been able to cut more of the fat out of it and get a better set out my story. It's still just over a page long though, and I really want to get it to a single side if I can. It's hard. And again, it's finding that balance of covering all the salient points, showing that you actually have a story and an understanding of structure, whilst also giving a sense that there's some kind of depth to the book. Oh, and make it snappy, please, as well. Anyway, but what about you? What writing challenges are you currently tackling? Maybe you can share some of your tips on writing that dreaded synopsis. I'd love to hear from you, so drop me a comment at joinedupwriting.co.uk, tweet me at JUPodcast, or head over to the Facebook page to make yourself heard there. Also, don't forget to leave me a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you're tuning in from. Right, let's get to today's interview with Luce Brett. So after many years writing and producing content in her role as Head of Education at the British Board of Film Classification, Luce is now a writer and health advocate who lives in the UK. She started writing about women's health, bodies and taboo after the birth of her second baby. She also had the misfortune to witness my car crash of an education during our teenage years at college. But her funny, frank memoir, PMSL, or How I Literally Pissed Myself Laughing and Survived to Tell the Tale, is her non-fiction debut and is out right now everywhere you can find good books. So here's our chat, recorded via Skype only yesterday actually, so enjoy.
Joined Up Writing.
Okay, Luce, thanks very much for joining me on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So why don't you just start off just telling us whereabouts in the world you're speaking from and give us a sense of how things are going in this weird global pandemic type world that we find ourselves in now.
Yes, well, quite. So I'm Luce. I live in London and I'm talking to you from my attic. And it's been a very exciting couple of weeks because despite the craziness of lockdown, my first book came out a week and a half ago. So it's been a super exciting and strange time because there's lots of things that are slightly sad, like not being able to do things that, like, if you've always dreamt of having a book come out, you know, you kind of want to go and look at Waterstones and see it on a table or whatever, and that's all much harder because is that an essential journey? I'm not, you know. Like
yeah, sure, I know what you're saying. And the whole launch thing as well is not quite the same. It's all online.
Yeah, you can't have a launch. I had lots of really lovely ideas of what I wanted to do for a launch, given the subject matter. Mm-hmm. Although I did manage to have get my local independent bookshop to set up a stall a couple of meters away from me with, and I had like a cake and some goodies, and then some other people came over like a staggered period of about 4 hours
great.
while I sort of sat in state, and they came and people brought
Socially
things
distanced.
and they told us what they wanted us to write in it, so we'd done it in advance and all that sort of stuff. And so I did manage to fulfill my sort of lifelong dream since I signed my contract for this book, which is to obviously you can't see me, but I'm actually holding it now, is to fill medical grade urine sample bottles with tequila.
Oh, perfect.
So people got one of those for free if they wanted one with the book.
Literally get pissed, yeah.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, I had rum as well, but rum did look like rather like it had a urine infection, so it was slightly squeamish.
That wasn't as appetizing.
And you know, I bought them myself. I didn't steal them from the NHS, and luckily I can recycle them when I next go to the hospital.
That's fine. Good. Well, given that you've kind of hinted about what the book might be about, but why don't you start us off by telling us about your debut non-fiction book, then, PMSL, or How I Literally Pissed Myself Laughing and Survived the Last Taboo to Tell the Tale.
Okay, so PMSL is a memoir. It's partly my story. It's partly a background, a sort of political and social and artistic background to urinary particularly, but actually other forms as well of incontinence. So it's telling my story about how I became incontinent after the birth of my first baby, and the sort of weird and wonderful sort of, at some point, hero's journey I was kind of set off on to go and work out, you know, on my quest to feel normal again. But it also looks further. So I sort of, part of of what happened to me was so shocking that it took me a while to sort of work out what I really thought. So for the last sort of few years of my continence journey, I did a lot of research and speaking to people and speaking to experts and medics. So there's also quite a lot of background. But the what I was trying to do was write something that was funny and engaging. So it's not a textbook, or it's just a health memoir, but it's also shining a light on something, on stigma and taboo, which I find generally quite interesting, like what it is we don't talk about in society and what we do. So the reason I wrote the book was because when it first happened, like, I mean, lots of people listening who've probably, you know, got families and stuff will know that, like, women get a bit leaky and things. And we all know the sort of stories of, like, if you took a trampoline and put it in the playground, no mums would go and jump on it, and why,
right,
and all those sort of ideas. And I was finding there was this increasing conundrum that I just couldn't quite get my head around, which was that, especially in my adult life over the age of about 30, I think it's almost impossible to get a group of like between 5 and 10 women together and give them a glass of wine or over tea and cake, and one of them not make a joke about sneezing, hurting herself. Yet at the same time, doctors will tell you that it's the biggest and last standing medical taboo that has within its own, which we might go into, within its own orbits, some even worse, more far-reaching taboos like non-urinary incontinence and things like that. But that taboo is like real and well known, and there are international organisations that work in it, and you know it affects 1 in 3 women, but the average in the UK I think is 7 years for someone to go and get help. The prevalence of things like people with bowel incontinence are probably much higher than people might realise in the general population. They sort of sit around 1 in 10. So you've got all these people with this very upsetting thing going on, like sort of laughing along to some jokes about it, but not actually getting the help they need. And that has loads of other really awful knock-on effects. So it's rubbish for you, anyone who's going through that, and you can feel very alone. And I used to just do that thing, you know, we all do it with diseases or things that have happened in our lives, big things, and you think like someone you love dies and you want to talk to someone else who's lost a friend or a relative or whatever. And I used to think, I'm not alone. If it's 1 in 3, like that's like 15 people on this bus. And yet I was alone.
Because
and when
you
I
couldn't talk about
doctor,
it.
And I was one of the moments I sort of finally became more determined and cross than I was upset and depressed about it all was when I was talking to my GP, and I said to her, doesn't everyone just find this completely awful? Like, I don't, that was when I was going through a period of fecal, also like bowel incontinence. And actually with urinary incontinence, it's a really strong indicator of whether someone will get postnatal depression. But nobody actually said that to me when I had really serious postnatal depression. So I just thought it was my fault for not coping with it well enough and not being like British and
so it all just sort of all feeds into the same thing.
Yeah, and with fecal incontinence, obviously it's even bigger. And I said to her, like, don't your other patients like just can't bear it? And she said, in 20 years, you're the only patient that's ever talked about your feelings, Lucy, about this. And I thought, but they must be. And she said, oh, they are. You can tell that people are going through hell. They must be because of how long it takes them to rock up. We know that from wider things like bowel cancer and stuff, that people don't go and get the help they need because they're too embarrassed or ashamed. And I think with incontinence also, because more people who have incontinence issues are older, especially women. A lot of women think they just have to put up with it, that it's just like, like Donald Trump or wrinkles, like you just have to like cope with it and
just one of those things. Yeah.
And we definitely have quite a big global healthcare issue of women feeling they can't make a fuss. I don't want to bother the doctor, and especially here, weirdly, where our healthcare isn't rationed in the same way as in other countries, we don't want to make a fuss. Don't bother the doctor with something that's not important. I mean, because I wrote the book on it, that literally, and it's like one of the first continence memoir, I've been told. I've become really, really impassioned about it. Like, there's some ghastly things, Wayne. There's just these awful things, like all these charities got together. So incontinence isn't a disease. It's not like cancer or whatever. It's a symptom. And it's really connected. So for most people, the like common things you'd think about is being much, much older. Perhaps prostate trouble in older men, and childbirth stuff, or childbirth menopause stuff for women. And yet it's really a massive issue. People with multiple sclerosis, with various other autoimmune conditions, elderly. It's very, it's often an indication in older women, particularly, who have falls. So quite a lot of hip problems where people have fallen over and hurt their hip have come from people running to the loo because they've got urgent incontinence. They haven't ever brought that up with the doctor. It's massively linked to stroke, to some cancer treatments, to dementia, to Alzheimer's, all these things. But if you're going, I remember talking to a friend of mine who did have cancer and saying, like, if you're having treatment for this big, scary, terrible disease, like, it might be that the thing that's making your life really hard is that the treatment has made you more likely to wet yourself. But that's not what you're going to necessarily bring up with a doctor, because it's not at the top of the list.
Sure. If
your mum has really serious vascular dementia, you would feel like an idiot, perhaps, or certainly this is what the charities who deal with those things said. They said, one, because it's a small part of lots of diseases, it doesn't ever get the concerted funding. If you see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
Because MS aren't going to put all their money into that. And then because it affects old women, like, people are less bothered about it. Like, just sort of historically, they tend to give to charities, don't they, that favour things that, that everybody knows someone who's had a heart attack, so everybody gives their money to and right, that's good. It's not criticising anyone for that, but it's like you don't see the people outside Sainsbury's at Christmas for the bowel and bladder.
No.
Society,
and like you say, a huge part of it is because people it is still a taboo and people don't want to talk about it.
And it's rank.
Yeah. Well, of course. Yeah. It's not like, it's not probably the number one topic of conversation when you go to a dinner party or something. But yeah, as you say, that's kind of, that all feeds into it. So obviously I know that you've got a blog, and you'd blogged about some of these things before, and you kind of expressing some of your experiences around this and all that kind of thing. But who was it always your plan you think, I'm going to try and turn this into a book, or did someone else suggest that to you, and how did you feel about it when that first came up, that idea?
So when I started blogging about it, it was weird, because it was some people who I'd never met contacted me via the blog. This is like back in the day, it was Blogger, it's like 10 years ago, and people would say, like, everything from like Hell's Tooth, God, I didn't think I was going to read that in a like mum blog, or I just finally someone's said something. that finally someone said something, happened quite a lot. And over the years since I've done that, and I mean, it's now no longer exists, but there was a sort of quite big women's website and sort of online magazine called The Pool. And I wrote a piece for them about 4 or 5 years ago that was it was called a long read. It was like a sort of several thousand words. It was like a long essay. And like famous people retweeted it, journalists who I knew who had been covering the mesh scandal, who had been on TV and radio here and in other countries talking about this all the time, sent me personal DMs on Twitter and Instagram and things saying, I've never told anyone, but I'm actually also going through this.
That must have been a great feeling. I mean, in a way that you kind of
a huge
come
privilege.
out and obviously, so to speak, and then you've kind of got people saying, oh, thank you, sort of thing.
Yes, and I suppose there's an ego kick as well. But I mean, what I found most interesting is that some people were clearly people who were shy or who didn't have lonely, didn't have someone to talk to, and actually, I think most of us like to feel helpful, don't we? And that was great.
Sure, yeah.
But I was struck by how many people were saying things like this. Or they'd tell me all about what happened after they had a baby and that happened. And then it would emerge through the email. I'd be like, hang on, that their son would be in his 40s. So these are people telling me a story from 40 years ago that they've never been able to talk about properly. And I think incontinence, like any stigmatized disease, well, like any disease, the only way what's the golden rule is that, you've got to talk about it with like dignity and kindness and hope that there's enough medical know-how and or investment in research and stuff for there to be innovations to help people get cured. Like a lot of incontinence stuff, well, look how that turned out. They're like the main innovation until quite recently was the mesh. But things like the Foley and catheters and things, some of those that people are still using haven't really been improved for like 100 years because there's no impetus for change because no one's talking about it enough. And it's just begun to change over the last 5 or 10 years. So I think I'm on a sort of, there's been, as we all know, like culturally, like when you and me did media studies together years and years and years ago, like you'd have blue liquid on nappy adverts and all the rest of it. And now you can have like sort of, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the recent sort of tampon adverts where they're just like properly going for it. And you're like, wow, okay, like we're not in Kansas anymore. And there's a lot of that going on. But so continence has had some things. I mean, these are like very sort of, I don't know, like ways you can stop it if people poo themselves and things you can do for people who've had spinal injuries sometimes that who just couldn't be helped in the past and things. But yeah, so I was hearing all this stuff and I thought there is a story here. There's a story that's like what happened to me isn't the worst. I talk in the book about that, about how like kind of I think all humans are the same. And when you're little, you compare scars, don't you? And talk about like who's, the person in the class who's got the broken leg is like the king for the whole term and all that. But I think that mine wasn't the worst birth injury. It wasn't the worst incontinence. I was quite unlucky because normal interventions didn't really work for me. And I stress all the way through the book that, there's a sort of ghoulish element to it, a sort of gore style to the way I describe the tests and things that happened to me, partly because it was just so sort of bewildering. I had to treat them like some sort of quasi existential art installation experience, because who wants to do a poo in front of like 5 strangers in an MRI machine and stuff? But I think that for a lot of people, they have a similar injury to me, and most people would be able to be helped. And what I felt really strongly was that this is an everyday story. It's happening all the time. And yet I felt so alone that I was suicidally depressed. And that's not right. And it's so easily solvable, because naming something is the first step in stopping it being scary. We know that. Anyone who's like coaxed a child out of a nightmare knows that. You turn the light on and you bear it all, and actually, it's not a monster, it's a teddy bear that's fallen down the back of the headboard or whatever. And I felt it was really like this with incontinence. It's like, I also felt that there was a sort of a result of medical misogyny, which meant that women hadn't really had the opportunity to sort of say, it is a problem that I feel a bit disgusting all the time. It is a problem that I can't have a adult relationship. There's
Sure.
like, the stats are awful, Wayne, like people whose marriages have fallen apart because they can't, and people who are just so ashamed that, like I say, these women telling me that they'd never told their daughters. And so when the book came out, I've had several friends say, like, oh my God, my mum bought your book. I didn't think, and she told me about it. And you think I don't know, one of the GPs I spoke to, because I mean, it's not a textbook, and I'm not a medic. I'm not from any kind of science or medical background, but I did obviously try to make sure that as best I could, it was evidence-based and I wasn't spreading any, untruths. And I got some doctors and some physios to read it and wrote a section with the GP. And the GP I wrote the final section with, which is kind of like a tick box. So if you don't know how to bring it up, things you could say to the receptionist and say, like, I'm having trouble with my pelvic floor, and he or she would know which doctor in the surgery will be able to help, without feeling embarrassed. And she said that she felt incontinence was a lot like cancer was when she first started her training, when even sort of 20, 30 years ago, cancer was still quite a taboo. People didn't, when we were kids, there would be some older people who wouldn't have said the word.
No, well, they would have said it under their breath, like they would say the word lesbian or something,
Exactly, or like, and that's the same with birth injuries, right? So it's like everybody knows that, like, Auntie Susan wasn't the same since that happened, but nobody talks about it. And and cancer was very like that. And she said incontinence very much inhabits that kind of space in the sort of general practice arena. Like, people won't go there, and the problem is, if you don't go there, then they can't help you, because it's very different. If you're someone who always needs to go for a wee, and so you can spot them, and in lockdown, nightmare. Yeah,
because there's no toilets.
Many men and women, but particularly women, like you can see them. You can see the look on their faces. People who are like, they're just as concerned about whether there's a public loo anywhere nearby as they are about, like, keeping their mask on in Sainsbury's or whatever.
Yeah.
And so you've got all of that kind of terror, but that is one type of incontinence. That's completely different to someone who wakes up in the night and needs a wee, or someone like me where it's stress, as in, jumping up and down. Might maybe wet myself. I mean, mine was so severe that there was one point and where they asked for a list of things, and I remember going through all the things that made me wet myself and sort of looking up and realizing that, like, I definitely had her attention, like, at least a minute before I stopped talking, because
she's like, you're still going.
And because I remember people, they kept saying, like, oh, like, if you sneeze or cough, and I was like, or stand up. And then, is that normal? Because also, if you don't talk about it, you don't know what's normal.
No.
So everyone said, oh, they leaked a bit, and it took me ages to realise that actually I was leaking a lot more than other women.
Yeah, and what does that mean? It covers so many different things, as you say, and unless you're going to speak about it, you don't know what that means. So from the sort of memoir point of view, obviously it covers a relatively big chunk of your life, as you say, because you had your children a little while ago, so it's kind of when the story sort of picks up. So did you find, looking back over such a long period of time, because I mean, the thing that I always think about is if I ever did anything to do with memoir or my life or anything, is my memory is absolutely terrible, and I'd be thinking, did that happen like that? When was that? What was that? So how did you find that side of it, sort of the practical side of it, in terms of, there's the memory side of it, but there's also the perspective side of it, because, if you're anything like me, you often find you look back at something that at the time you might have thought meant this, or you had a particular perspective on it, and then obviously as the years go by, you see it differently, and then you think, well, hang on, am I remembering it now? Am I projecting? Am I thinking of it kind of different how it was? So how did you kind of cope with all that sort of side of it?
So there's a number of things. So because I love memoir, it's one of my favourite genre. Like so I was lucky. A medical memoir is, if you've had lots of interventions and that they've been unsuccessful, and you've
documented
had lots of operations and stuff, and you were depressed as well, as I was, that meant that I had, like, I mean, oh, Wayne, I've got a filing cabinet full of hospital letters, like, and they're all the, like, hospital numbers of shame for the, like, urogyne clinic and the incontinence unit and stuff. So I could patchwork the dates back, although I still it's funny once it's out and it's out in the world. I think that there's one date that's slightly wrong in it, actually, because I had misremembered it. And I have to make a caveat at the beginning that it's based on my memory of a time when I was quite unwell for some of it. But I use the letters and the doctor's notes. So I had quite a lot of that, because you get the sort of letter back from the hospital saying, well, thank you for sending this nice lady. And you can sort of work out what was going on in the story. I blogged for quite a bit of it, so I had quite a lot on the record there, to go through and to use. And I had sort of kept sporadic notebooks and things, but there was one point where my entire bedroom and lounge were just these piles of notes and bits of paper. But I also think with memoir, you're never necessarily going to get every pause in the right place with how someone said something. And
no, of course not.
There were a couple of bits where I showed someone who was, so if it was something that clearly involved someone else, I talked it through with them or showed them. And there was one bit which is one of my favourite bits, and the person who said it to me was like, God, I don't remember that. And I was like, oh my, and she was like, well, to be honest, it sounds like something I would say.
Yeah, well, that's right. I was going to say, do you think it's as much about us capturing the kind of essence of the truth of it? It doesn't necessarily have to be, completely pure to the letter, as long as people are, sort of happy with the kind of the spirit of it as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think that the spirit of it is right. And I think that also, well, I don't know. So I didn't write this story about anybody else. I mean, not because I'm a massive show-off and a narcissist, although I am, but because they're not my stories to tell.
Yeah.
And I felt quite clear on that. And the sort of memoirs or political sort of memoirish books, like the sort of Caitlin Moran memoirs, for example, which sort of jump between her memories of her life and her thoughts on feminism or whatever, and pop music and stuff. So that's where I was most squeamish and concerned. So I had to do a number of things. One, not name my children. I did remove two things where one of them felt, he was only very little when I talked it through with him, and obviously I had my husband as a sense check on that. With the kids, for example, I've not named them, and I've done some conflating. With my friends, they're all conflated into two friends,
right,
called Cat and something else.
Yeah.
And with my kids, they're only little, they're not adults. There are lots of interesting things I could say about their reactions to it, but I didn't want to go too far into that, because that's telling you stuff about them that's up to them whether they share that with the world. And I was very conscious of that, because I have read autobiographies and things where I felt that people went quite far in how they spoke about how other people felt about events. And some of that is quite interesting from a writing point of view, because it's show not tell, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you can sort of, with a memoir, it's quite a good check on that. Actually, was that nurse feeling embarrassed? I don't know.
Or is that how I thought she might be feeling? Yeah.
Right. And hallmarks of how you write authentically and stuff, and how you write, which would be quite useful if you were writing a thriller or whatever. So I had to be quite disciplined about that. And it's amazing when you recount a memory, how often, as you say, you're imbuing things with it, you're bringing judgments from you now. And I had to do a lot of working out how to do that. And some of that's stylistic. It's about saying but I didn't know that then, or whatever.
Yeah.
And some of it's about saying, okay, so I didn't know whether that nurse was cross with me, but I do know that she said X, Y, and Z, and that when I checked my birth notes and things, actually my memory that she wrote something down and that was quite snotty is true, because that's there.
Yeah.
So I had to say, I don't know what this woman thinks of me, and that sort of thing.
Sure. You're leaving it for us to make up our own minds, really, just presenting it.
Yeah, and there's just sort of silly things I don't know if you've read it all, but there's a character who lots of people who've read it really like, called Carol, and Carol is my incontinence nurse, and she's kind of a hero, really. And medical professionals who've read it talk about Carol being a really example of good care, and she was. But Carol was two nurses. But I put them together to make Carol. And I get a bit meta at the end, because the last scene, I talk to Carol about how I've created Carol and this nurse.
Yeah.
But she Carol helped me a great deal, but just because she treated my incontinence and looked at my skirt doesn't mean she wanted to be in a book about me.
Yeah.
So I had to be quite careful. Like, we had to just say, like, large teaching hospital, London. At one point, I had to change something because I had to do a sort of quick reckoning of how many maternity units there were near where I was in London. So to make sure that I didn't inadvertently identify people.
Yeah.
Now, it's possible that people will be inadvertently identified, because when you get to complex surgery, sometimes there's only certain people that could have done it.
Sure.
But yeah, I tried my best. The other problem was, as anyone who's sort of worked in any kind of office environment over the last 2 or 3 years will know, the sort of spectre of GDPR is still sort of a nightmarish vision for all of us. And there was one point when I submitted the first draft when I realised that because I'd been so wanting to get it right, I'd basically included my first child's date of birth.
Right.
So that sort of thing we had to sort of play with. So it's all within 2 or 3 weeks of when those things happen, but you don't want to accidentally say something.
But I suppose that was it helpful in that respect, working with, because is it Bloomsbury? But this is published with an
Yes, it's Bloomsbury.
So you'd be working with an editor and a team of people. So I suppose from that point of view, that was helpful, was it, for all that side of stuff, especially with it being your debut as well? I suppose a lot of that stuff was kind of new to you, was it?
Yeah, it was. Although, because of what it was about, my agent, actually, you asked me earlier and I didn't really answer the question why I wrote the book. I did it because people really connected with it, but also because a friend of mine sort of basically said, you need to write a book on it. I know someone who's an agent, and then sent an email that just said, oh, Lucy wants to pitch a book. And this agent was like, okay, great. Like, I'll speak to you this afternoon. And I was like, what? So, because it was such a weird story, what weird story, but it's
taboo by its nature,
yeah. And there's not a lot of books about this, certainly from a patient's point of view. So at one point it was number 1 in the Amazon family lifestyle and neurology charts with like textbooks. But they, because it was a bit of a jump, and because it is a taboo, and taboo about incontinence is everywhere, or, however much we all pretend we're really grown up about it, actually a lot of people still find it quite tricky. And, how would that translate to a sales meeting? I don't know. So my agent asked me to write it, which is an unusual way around. So when I got my deal with Bloomsbury, I had written a complete draft that had gone through 3 iterations of me with my agent. So it was over about a year. We had got to the point where
it was in good shape.
And it was like 90,000 words, and it was like proper, including like down to the sort of more healthcare section at the end and everything.
So it was kind of ready to go.
Yeah. So what I didn't have to do was piece it through together with anyone else, which is what would normally happen, I think, with this, because it was already done. Because me and my agent had been, you can describe it to people, but when they read it, I mean, although, I don't know, it just makes me laugh every time because it happens all the time. So people go, oh, I read it, it was quite good. It's like,
yeah, that's always damning it with faint praise, like they're surprised.
Like my mum's friend saying, like being lovely about it.
I actually liked it. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, I just, I wasn't expecting it to be like, to like want to keep reading and to read it all so fast. And it's like, well, and someone said to me, oh yeah, and it's like, they said, you keep like repeating these themes, and like, is that on purpose? Yes, it was. That is what I was going for, which is awful. I mean, one should never be churlish about it or take the mickey out of any kind of. I've been very, very well supported in this, and most people, not unlike actually when I had serious incontinence, when you get most people on their own, like most people are really nice.
Sure.
And really supportive about it. And so most people were like, oh God, that's a weird idea for a book. And then I'd talk to them and they'd say, oh, it sounds great, and be like, nice, but yeah. So I did do a bit of that, but like Bloomsbury were hands-on, but that was more about things like if you're going to quote from a poem or whatever, and that sort of thing I had to do quite a bit of like work on, which I'd never done before. And I don't know, but like I've got a quote from E.M. Forster's, I think it's from Passage to India, where he talks about only connect. It's a famous phrase from him. And in fact, our English teacher, when I was in a class with you, that's mentioned because I wrote it down, having never read anything by Ian Forster. And when we were going through for copyright, they were like, "Oh, you've got to get that." And I was like, "What? Ian Forster, what are you on about?" And the little sod didn't die until like 1970 or something. So
Right.
I had to get permission to use a quote from Ian Forster. I was just like, he lived so long.
It's surprising that it's still,
It's never what you think. When I was recording the audiobook.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mentioned that I'm trying to talk about like how women's bodies were treated when we were at secondary school and primary school, and people our age, the sort of Generation Xers, and how, I mean, I feel like we were sort of thought we'd got so far with, you know, feminism and stuff like that, and like everyone knew where their G-spot was, but did we really know much about women's bodies more broadly? And I say that like the boys at school used to say like, "Whoa, body form."
That's right. Yeah.
As they're kind of like, you're in a mood.
I remember it. Yeah, I remember it well. I don't actually remember doing it in that context, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
So, but like, that's a good way to age someone, you know, to work out if they know what you're talking about. But when I did the audiobook, I couldn't sing it because
the rights.
Yes, it's just like, it's really weird, like where those things sort of wind up.
But so how was it recording the audiobook in general? How did you find that? Because obviously, again, it would probably be slightly. Did the pandemic and all that kind of thing affect how you could do that and where you could do that?
It totally did. So I was really nervous about doing it. But Bloomsbury were quite clear that it works really well to have the writer if it's a memoir or
such a personal thing as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, in this case, sort of squared because it's like such a personal sort of story, and so they wanted me to do it, and I was a bit worried because I wasn't sure my voice was good enough for it, but they were like, "It's all right, you know, I'll be there and your editor will be there and your agent can come and it'll be all right and we'll do it over 3 or 4 days.
Got a big audience.
We'll be really relaxed, have a whole week in the studio, it'll be really great." And so I was like persuaded, and then the global pandemic hit, and so I ended up recording it in a studio, like a proper where they record audio all the time, but it was like me and one person, a producer, recording it. I saw one other person fleetingly who was the person who ran the building. There were other books being done at the same time, but we were all staggered going in and out. And when you could go to lunch, there was only a few people because it was at the stage in the pandemic where we had to you couldn't share both users. I mean, obviously you wouldn't at the same time, but we couldn't, me and the producer couldn't have like one toilet between us. So they could only have, I think, 2 or 3 books recording at the time because they only had enough toilets for 2 or 3 people. And it was very strange. And at that point, I hadn't really left my house. But there were other things. So you had it when you read out the title. And the reason there's the long title was because we discovered mostly men, but didn't know what PMSL stood for, and I got that from like Mumsnet and similar parenting websites, like sort of back in the days of emoticons, but also we wanted it to be clear what it was about,
of course,
but kind of gentle and like not scary, because the word incontinence is quite scary, sounds more medical than it is, and stuff. But even that title is like last taboo to tell the tale. Like, and I use a lot of alliteration and assonance because I'm like juvenile, and that's I really am like it. You know, I aspire to great things, but I'm not sure I ever hit them. And I really love a pun, and
so
those things are just a nightmare to read out. The other problem with it is, I don't know. I mean, you've always been a showman, and like I always remember that at school and things. And I think that you know, I like a performance myself. But if you've written it, I've ended up doing things like laughing at my own jokes. I mean, how ungracious is that? Like, awful.
So it was a good experience. So you learnt a lot for next time.
Yeah, and it was really great fun because I mean, like, in a lot of my career, I have done a lot of media and been a media spokesperson and done a lot of lecturing and talking, but it's quite something reading your own book, and it's like got a spine and a cover, and it's like a proper book, and it felt like a real privilege. Like you never think that would actually happen. So I was very aware of how lucky I was being able to do it.
Well, it's fantastic. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. It is really cool. Like, I didn't think I would be so overexcited when I saw it, but it is really cool.
I think it's great that you are. It makes a change. It doesn't work trying to be, faux cool. Just go with it. If you're excited about it, then show it. I think it's a great achievement, and you should be proud. Like you say, it's a shame about a lot of people that are having to do these things, and it's not quite the same as it would have been in inverted commas normal times, and how you might have imagined it when you first thought about a book coming out and all that kind of thing. But then, another way of looking at it is it's really memorable, and it's completely different experience to how it hopefully will be next time. So.
And also, I think that the lockdown, and I think this is true for people who are pitching and writing and things at the moment now, so like people who listen to this who want to do it, I would say that there's been quite an interesting shift, and maybe it will last forever. I'm always skeptical about things lasting forever, but there's been a sort of slight shift in the sands. So you're much more likely, I think, right now to get someone to take a submission from you. Mm-hmm. Stephen McGann, who I very much admire both as a writer and as a performer, he had liked a blog I'd written years ago about incontinence song called The Midwife. Yeah. And my agent, neither of us are friends with him or anything, and she just slipped into his DMs on Twitter and said, "Do you want to read it?" And he said yes, and he read it and wrote a lovely thread on Twitter.
It was great.
Yeah. And because obviously I don't know if people would know, but his wife is the head writer on Call the Midwife is Heidi Thomas, who was a hero of mine, really. So it's so exciting that he read it, and he and so he's done a lot of stuff about women's health and taboo in his career, and I think he's got a background in health communications and science communications as well. So, but what I mean is, I don't think that would have happened if it hadn't been for lockdown at all. I think that there's
because people have got a little bit more time as well. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, particularly at the beginning of when we sort of properly locked down, sort of the end of March. I mean, I did see quite a lot of agents and people actually asking for submissions, which you very rarely see, only in very small concentrated amounts of time. Because they've suddenly got time to actually read things. Yeah, because a lot of the time they haven't got time to read things.
But also, I think it's because, like you say, what's normal, what's not, what's going to be normal in the future. So all bets are off. I think that again, some people will be going for, as always is the case, for repeating formulas that have worked.
Yeah.
But I think quite a lot of people are seizing the day, and I think that if you've got the weird, wacky idea that you're pretty sure that agent will like, but they have, or whoever, or that publisher will like, but this might be your moment. Do you know what I mean? It really might be the moment to sort of be a bit bold, because also, I mean, we've perhaps all not been bold enough. Anyway, why not grab the day? If you're going to wake up one morning thinking that your biggest problem is how you're going to invite loads of people to your book launch, and then the entire world's going to turn to shit, then we might as well all kind of start living it up a bit, I think, and doing what we really want to do. Because I do feel lucky about that as well, that I really, really, this is the book I wanted to write, and that was what I felt inordinately lucky about, that the agent at Bloomsbury, I met her on my birthday, my 42nd birthday, and the publisher at Bloomsbury, the editor, she got it straight away. She didn't try to change anything that I wanted to do in it. I was like, I want to write a memoir, I want it to be all first person, I want it to jump between, I want it to go into all the detail, I want it to represent things that patients go through from the very sort of claustrophobic view of being a patient. I want to swear in it, I want to, sort of thing. And she was just like, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really happen. Like, I went on my birthday for breakfast, and me and my agent had all these conversations about, like, they probably wouldn't offer in advance. I wasn't a known. They might want to bring other people in and all this sort of stuff. And we'd really thought about it. And when I got there for breakfast, my agent's like, Lucy, Lucy. And she's like, she told me that they had made an offer of an advance and what they wanted to do. And she was like, basically, all our bargaining stuff is like it's all gone because they've
They've
said
already
yes to
exceeded
it
it, yeah.
before we started. And like, I mean, couldn't be like, it's like, that's like, you know, that never happens, does it? And my agent was like, no, it never happens. Like, and Charlotte just walked in and she was just great. She loved it. She had already shown it to loads of people. She had the only thing she did do was highlight all the synonyms I put for female genitalia in it, because I was saying that it wasn't that sweary, and she was maintaining that it was.
It was quite sweary, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, to be honest, people now say it was quite sweary. It's like the first draft I said that would be the only thing. It really was quite, yes, it's much toned down. But partly because I wanted it to be true, and it's back to what you were saying about Memoir. I was really upset when this happened to me, and like the very first paragraph of the book is about, I don't know how to describe what's happening to me, and I don't know what words to use. And like, if I'm using like medical terms, what if I say the wrong word for, like I'd misdescribe it, and if I don't, then like, do I use kids' words for it? Do I use vulgar terms for it? And like, what does that say about me? How do I have a relationship with someone who's about to see something where, like, normally if I'm going to show someone my private parts, I'd expect to drink or something first. Like, if I'm going to have to do this, how am I going to do it? Because it's such an intimate thing to talk about. How do I do that? And that's like literally the first paragraph of the book. And so I fought back on some of the vulgar language because that was there because I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
Because I was really scared and frightened and in a corner. And, you know, I did one test where there's loads of people standing watching you wee on your own feet. Like, well, hell, I think that a lot of people would either double down in terms of getting a bit crude and nervy, or go silent.
Yeah.
And I felt like those were the two options I had. And I wanted to reflect that. But as the book goes on, it gets less sweary as I get older and more reflective and able to see a bigger story at play about other women and about myself. And another thing where people said, did you do that on purpose? Yes, I did it on purpose.
I did do that one, yeah. But I suppose as well, you're coming back to like why you know, the publisher was so interested in it and wanted to pick it up and everything else. I mean, I get a lot of the time we talk to people about when they submit things, and I've talked to agents and I've talked to people that have had lots and lots and lots of books published, and you'll often speak to an agent and they'll say, you know, this whole thing about I want an excuse to stop reading when they pick up a submission, and you say, yeah, but what is the sort of thing that keeps you reading, that you keep going? And they find it really, really hard to describe. But when it comes down to it, 9 times out of 10, it's actually voice more than anything else, like more than the story, more than the subject matter, more than anything. And I guess it's like when you meet somebody for the first time, you know, that subconscious thing that you get, whether you either subconsciously or not, you think, well, I like this person or I don't like this person.
Or I care what they have to say, I think they're right.
Yeah, exactly. Even if they've not really said anything, you know, sometimes you get that from people, don't you? You kind of think, I just can sort of connect. And I think that's what it comes down to. I think it's the voice, and I think that would have been what kind of shone through initially. And as you say, regardless of anything else, it's that they want to hear that, and they want to hear that unique voice. And I think writers, when they first start out as well, there's always that thing, you're trying to write like somebody else.
Yeah.
And
you're never going to be Stephen King because Stephen King is Stephen King.
Exactly, yeah. And it's just much more interesting if you just yourself anyway, I think.
Yeah, and it's all about confidence. Remember, I'm quite old for my first thing to be, you know, I was over 40, and maybe there's confidence. Maybe there was like having told loads of people my medical story anyway, so being used to it. But I also think, and like credit to my agent, because she sort of let me do this, because I was simultaneously wanting to be very authentic and to just tell it how I wanted to tell it, but also thinking like, is that good enough? Will that make sense? Will it also, because it's very exposing, like if people don't like me, this is me. So they really don't like me if they read the book.
It's not like you're hiding behind some fiction or some characters or whatever.
Or a genre or anything. But my idea for it was, I wanted it to be like you had gone to a party or a cafe, or you're in a pub or something, and you're sitting next to someone like, I don't know, like someone's big sister who tells you her story, and it makes you laugh and it makes you cry, and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe she said that. And then you're like, I didn't know that. And you're like, oh, and I feel like that too. And that's what it was supposed to be like. Yeah. Like sitting with
a sort of confessional almost, just, you know.
And it's what I wanted when I was standing on my own on like Highgate Hill, having worked my jeans, being told I had a prolapse, not knowing what that meant. Sort of sounded like someone had said my womb was falling out. Said I had to do physio in a class. What does that even mean? Had a baby screaming. Thought I was probably had postnatal depression.
Just wanted somebody to say, well, actually, it's all right, because it's something that I've gone through, and this is.
Or like, it's not all right.
Yeah.
But it will be. Like one day you won't sound with that brittle voice anymore. One day you'll be able to talk about this without crying. And that's what I kind of wanted to do. So I had to kind of go full throttle in terms of it is very, very frank, partly because I am. And so it would have been disingenuous if I'd been coy anyway, but also because I think you can smell coyness. Really, it stinks in books where people have shied away. And it's just as problematic as a reader as people who are like overreaching and talking about something they don't know about, or implying, you know, when people get all highfalutin, and it's like, why are you doing that? Because like, I already liked you and now you're using loads of long words and I just think you're a prick.
So kind of as we kind of move towards wrapping things up, have you kind of got a sense of what I know it's really early days and your debut has only just come out, but have you got a sense of what you may or may not be working on next, or, you know, where do you want to go from here? I really like memoir, and I didn't realise I would like this, but I like health memoir actually, and I like books that play with that. So like more recently things like Maggie O'Farrell's I Am, or back in the day like Blake Morrison's and When Did You Last See Your Father, which are sort of domestic and intimate everyday stories, but tell us stuff about ourselves, or we can see ourselves in them, or reject ourselves in them, or whatever. So I am looking at that because you have to hone down your life when you're writing a memoir as well. So there's lots of things that are not in there. Like one of my children is quite irked because he's not in it very much. and it's not that I don't think he's brilliant. I do. But it just this story, he didn't fit in this story particularly.
Well, that's it. 'Cause like my mum was sort of saying, well, am I in it? Sort of thing. And my dad and other friends. And it's like really, this sounds so rude, but it's not about you. That's why.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
And that means you stand or fall on it if you write a memoir that is really intimate like that. But that's what I always like in a reader. That's why I loved that Maggie O'Farrell book, because I just felt like I knew her, and she was, you know, and it was like meeting a new old friend or something. So I have been quite bewitched by this genre anyway, but also while I was writing PMSL, I was also on another health journey, which I didn't really realise at first, but because I had very early arthritis, so despite not having been, you know, gymnast or something when I was younger, I had early onset osteoarthritis and inflammatory arthritis, so I sort of veer between being totally fine and like needing to use crutches or worse. And so that I'm sort of looking around at that. But also, I mean, and then maybe it's just the age I am, you know, there is an intersection with how we treat ladies of a certain age and what their health means and what we might expect from them, but also all these like sort of fainting Victorian ladies, and sort of chronic illness is quite an interesting area if you look at like representations of it in like books and stuff from when we were young, you know, and sort of Jane Austen and things, and like how it tracks. So maybe something about that, but that's super early days really, and like maybe no one will buy it, so maybe this was my one shot. But if it was, I did enjoy it, and I did have tequila in wee
Exactly, yeah. So it went pretty well anyway.
Yeah.
Right, well, so where can people find out more about you online and stuff and follow you or whatever?
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram as @Luce Brett. And I have a blog called When You Are That Woman. And there's obviously like the Amazon pages. I mean, when I'm not writing, I do other stuff. So I've got an official website launching in a couple of weeks, which is more sort of about health advocacy and also like training and things like that around like narrative and storytelling and memoir and things. But I haven't started that yet because I don't think I can say I can teach someone how to write a memoir. But what I have spent my whole career doing, and that was also very good practice, is storytelling and distilling narrative, because I spent a lot of time like watching films as a film reviewer or writing about or regulating industry. So I've always been a narrative person. So that's where people can find me, and they can find the book in all good bookshops. And it's hardback and it's very nice. And we spent a lot of time on the illustrations and the cover. So the illustrations are slightly graphic, but they are
they are. Some of them are.
Yes. But then also like again with that, I thought actually my book's partly about
breaking down taboos and showing.
If you don't know what an episiotomy or a third degree or a second degree tear is or looks like,
exactly, yeah,
then how can you possibly rebuild your life if you didn't know what was there before and what it looks like now? And that's what the book's sort of about, like on a meta level, but also on a very specific physical level. So we had to do that, but we wanted to make the cover feel like a cover, because when I very first thought about writing the book, before I even had an agent, I did talk to a couple of people about it, and they sort of said, basically, you're not famous, so you can't write a memoir. Who are you?
Right.
You know, it would be better if you were a GP. And it's like, but I'm not. Right? So I'm not Dawn French either. So that unfortunately, I can't write that book. And they said people would be embarrassed to buy it or read it. So the cover's really lovely because it was designed so that if somebody, that it would tell you what it's about, but not.
I know what you're saying. Yeah.
So it's not necessarily what I imagined or what I would have gone for, but they very much did it so that, also because I'm old now, but like when this first happened when I was 30, it was so that women of that age and men of that age wouldn't feel like a complete idiot reading it, because it wouldn't look like, it wouldn't be obvious to someone opposite you on the bus what it was necessarily about. So it's very classy. It looks nice on a bookshelf.
It does, and it could equally be the cover of like a fiction book. So
yes, it's like a lot of those. It's quite voguish, isn't it? This sort of handwriting.
Yeah,
it's funny, that sort of stuff, because how that's so exciting when you're like, it looks like a proper book.
I know, it's weird. It's because it is a proper book.
Yeah.
Well, it's great. Well, it's been great chatting to you for the podcast, and I wish you very best of luck with it. I'm sure it's going to be continue to sell well and everything else. It can already tell from the early buzz and stuff online that it's going to be great. So congrats.
No worries, and thank you very much.
Okay, thanks again to Luce, and you should definitely check out PMSL. I'm currently reading it, and it's funny, sad, and inspiring. And I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. That's it for this week, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from to have the podcast downloaded automatically every time. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions, or comments, and I'll give you a mention in a future show. Next week, I'm chatting to fantasy sci-fi author Matt Wallace, but until then, stay safe. I'm Wayne Kelly, happy writing and reading, and I'll see you next time.